Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast. Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching. I'm Katie.
And I'm Elena.
Hey, Elena. How's it going? It's good to see you.
It's great to see you. I know we're just kind of hopping on and rolling right into this one. We've both been very busy. So yeah, Katie, what's been going on with you? It seems like it's been a busy couple weeks as well.
It has, yeah. It has been a couple weeks of ups and downs for sure, but I have entered a stretch of time where I'm just home, which is amazing. I feel like it's a lot easier to get into like a training routine and a coaching routine and a life routine when you're not, sleeping in a different bed every night. So that's been really good for me. And I've had some workouts that have felt pretty good after having a lot of weeks of workouts that didn't feel good. So I'm hoping we're on the up after a bunch of downs. How about you, Elena?
Great. Okay. Well, first off, love to hear that. Also, funny how, yes, you can't get into a routine when you're not actually in the same place every day. That makes a big difference. So, really glad that you're getting to spend some time at home. And also, workouts feeling good is always one of the best feelings. Like, once the training starts to kick in, it's a good feeling. So, that's exciting. Yeah, I would say on my end, I've been good also. Like, similarly, also spending some time at home and really consistently at home for like the last several weeks. We have a lot of people that we're hosting because it's ski season and that's really fun. People are coming out to ski, which is great, but I actually get to be in my own bed and have similarly been feeling some of like the training kicking in after a long time of not feeling as great, which has been super exciting. So we're kind of in that like fun end of winter, early spring, like all the winter work that felt really dreadful is maybe starting to pay off kind of phase, which is always exciting. So
That's fantastic. Yeah, and actually, let me ask you on that. So, you're someone who's really, really good at integrating skiing. We've talked about this so many times on the podcast before, but integrating lots of other sports with your main running. How do you think about that in this sort of shoulder season where it's really inconsistent in terms of the weather? Like, you might get a blizzard and then be able to do some incredible skiing. Is that going to back up against run training that you'd plan? Like, how are you structuring your own training right now?
yeah, I think I still try to use similar-ish rules as what we've talked about before, where my big rock right now is still running, and especially as I'm kind of gearing up for some of my early season races, like I am going to try to hit the long runs no matter what. However, I'm loving mixing in skiing as just like easy volume. So on the easy days, or even after a workout, like I'll do a run workout in the morning and then get a ski in the afternoon. I've done that a few times. And I think there's a little bit of like taking advantage of just like the conditions and the opportunities. So it's actually snowing here quite a lot. And so this weekend will probably be a little bit more skiing mixed in with some running. And I'm excited about that. And it works out okay because I also structured my races such that I wasn't trying to hit a really big goal race in February or March like I have in previous seasons. And instead, my first big race is, I should say big, my first race is in May. So I have a little bit of time. And that's why like being able to mix those things in is just both fun and also still good volume for me. And I think it's also been making me feel a lot stronger. So that's the triple whammy, I guess. All of it feeding into their same goals.
Yeah, I love that. And I think this is something that athletes who maybe aren't skiing anymore at this point can also think about in the context of right now you can sometimes bike outside, you sometimes can't. You're sort of in the shoulder season of all of the sports. And I like the idea of being able to optimize for like what is going to feed me some joy and what is also going to help me with my training. But I think the biggest principle that our athletes should be remembering is that a lot of these things can kind of be subbed out. Like get your key workouts done and then fill everything else with easy volume and you will get where you're trying to go. It doesn't really matter what the easy volume looks like because you're still kind of building that overall durability and aerobic base.
Yep, I totally agree. The only thing I would say on that too is that there is something that maybe it's like a mental thing in addition to a physical stimulus of just having a big ski day and then coming back and being like, you know what, I'm still going to go for my easy run and just like getting it in on tired legs. And maybe there's like a mental side and a physical side. It's like that made me feel really tough to go do. And also like I'm getting that extra stimulus. And usually that's when people are like trying to regroup and shower after skiing anyway. So I'm not really missing much with friends that are staying here. So it's like a good way to just like mix all these things in and like reframe it as it's all training, it's all helping me, that kind of thing.
I love that. Well, speaking of things that are all training and what's going to help us, we're doing another grab bag today. We love the grab bag. We've just had all these random things to talk about. And so we threw some insights into our outline. We threw some questions into our outline that we actually have for each other questions that we've gotten from listeners. So I think this is going to be a fun one. But if it's okay with you, Elena, I'm going to kick it off with a new test to think about your readiness to train that I have thought a lot about in life, but that I saw in a blog post. And I was like, wait, this is actually kind of backed in science and real.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm so eager to hear this. Yeah, take it away.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the feel and stare test to assess readiness. And this is something that I said was sort of in my head already because I live in a fifth floor walk up in Boston. And I will say, at the end of the day, I'm coming back up my stairs, and how I feel when I get to the top of the stairs is usually a very good indicator of where my body is at with respect to training. Like, are we overdoing it? Are we actually in a really good place? How is my workout going to feel tomorrow? And it's honestly a lot more reliable than like what my Garmin readiness score says or what my Oura ring is telling me. Sometimes those things are aligned, but I'm telling you, this whole feel and stare test is really, really powerful. And then I read this blog post, which I'm going to link in our outline on. It's actually called the Feel and Stare Test. And so they say that one way to assess your readiness is to follow this very specific protocol where you walk up a flight of stairs 2 at a time, you pause at the top, you notice how you feel, and then you sort of assess your readiness across 3 different buckets. So one of them is like, I feel fresh, that was totally chill, I'm ready for a key loading day. The middle one is like, I feel normal, like I'm not exactly fresh, but it's okay to load things. And then there's the feeling of being really fatigued where you have this breathless sensation and you're just like, okay, I have done enough, I need an easy day or two. So most people have access to stairs. This is not like a bougie gear pick of the week or anything, but just trying this out if you're not exactly sure where your body is at, I think it's really, really reliable. And this year for me has been all about kind of figuring out how to use a little bit less of like the Garmin screaming at you data and a little bit more of feel. So you could just use stairs and figure it out. This is going to be hopefully a foundation of me assessing my own readiness going forward.
Wow, I love this. Also, I mean, just like really resonates actually. Like it makes a lot of sense. I've had this feeling too where you notice if you're going upstairs and you're like, wow, this is really, really hard. It's kind of funny to me that something so simple and that feels like intuitively so real, because I've noticed this myself, is like we haven't thought about codifying it before like this. But now it's like, oh, we have these quote unquote scientific-ish states of like fresh, normal, and fatigued, and it's as simple as the stairs. But yeah, I totally get this. I last week I actually had this feeling because Will and I went to go watch Les Mis at the theater, and we had to climb up several flights of stairs to get to our balcony seats. And it was after we had both done big workouts, and we were both like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. And that's probably about right because our bodies were really tired after those workouts. So yeah, I'm gonna start thinking about this too. Although I'm no longer in my, multi-story Boston walk-up apartment anymore, so maybe I'll have to find some other stairs around me.
Yeah, it is pretty brutal. And sometimes I feel like adapted to it. I'm like, oh, and I'm an athlete, I can totally handle this. And sometimes I'm like, maybe I should just sleep on the steps outside because I can't do this today. So anyway, feel and stare test for all of our athletes. The bougie gear pick of the week is just stairs. That's all we're talking about today.
I love it. Also, like, what a great way to introduce a little bit more of a feel aspect into it, because we are always encouraging athletes to try to develop their own feel, and this is like such a good feel test. So yeah, great. I'm a big supporter of this. I'll have to read this blog post now too, because I'm curious of how they thought of it too, but it sounds great. Awesome. So I'll jump in with my insights, I guess, of the week, or some thinking. So last time in our grab bag, we had talked about some supplementation that Katie and I do, like very basic, like just a few things that we are more consistent about. Like for me, iron and vitamin D, we talked about that. But I've actually had a couple supplementation changes in my world, and I wanted to talk about it a little more broadly. The first is one that I have done off and on, but now I'm more committed to doing it like every day, and that's creatine. And this has gotten a lot of hype in like the weightlifting, or I think like strength world, because it is usually thought of as like a muscle strengthening supplement. However, there's actually a lot of really interesting research on just how beneficial it is across the board for all humans, but especially for women, because creatine, just for background in case anyone isn't familiar with it, it's like a naturally occurring compound in your body. It's mostly stored in your muscles, but also in the brain, and it contributes to the production of ATP, which is like the main source of energy for cells. But even though it's naturally occurring and we can get it through food, women also produce about 70 to 80% less creatine than men. And also, if you're not getting it through meats in your diets or mostly animal products, then it's hard to, keep up to that 5 grams that's recommended daily, I think, for most people. And it's been shown to increase dampen the effects of sleep deprivation and reduce the symptoms of depression. There was a really interesting study that was reviewing how creatine had been found to be a really effective dose for reducing depressive symptoms that was actually accidentally found through having it tested with Parkinson's patients. And they actually found that as they were trying to test it for Parkinson's disease, it was actually reducing their depressive symptoms. So really interesting. I've started taking it at just 5 grams a day in orange juice because it's better absorbed with vitamin C. And also some of like the bodybuilding worlds, or I think just generally if you read about how to like start taking creatine, there's some protocols that are like you load it really quickly. So you try to take like 20 grams every day for 5 days. I just didn't really feel the need to do that because it can cause a lot of water weight retention and just kind of feel really heavy. And also, if you're not hydrating really well, it can be a little bit dangerous to take on that much creatine. So I'm just taking 5 grams a day. It has a slower buildup in my body, but I'm okay with that. And I've been feeling really good. And I don't know if that's because of training and because of spring, and there's all these other confounding factors. We always talk about this, so it's hard to say if it's from this, but I have been feeling really good with the creatine. I feel like I'm recovering a bit better. My mood's been really good. My energy's been pretty good. So I'm on the creatine train for a little bit and curious if other people have experimented with it, but that's my new supplement for right now.
Oh, this is super interesting. So probably like 50 people have told me to start taking creatine. I have not actually done it yet. I haven't gotten on that train, but I know a lot of people who are very, very focused on it. I'm curious, Elena, do you find that you feel stronger in things that are more strength oriented? So like hill climbing or weightlifting, or is it really just kind of like across the board, your runs feel good? Again, there's a lot of issues with causality here. We can't know exactly that it was this one variable, but just talk me through like these sort of physical changes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that I do think I'm feeling best from what I would call maybe more the strength power side, which is when I'm on climbing on hills, on trails, or from skiing, for example, just a little bit more power. But I'm also feeling better from a speed perspective too, which is maybe just training. And yes, creatine is more thought of as like a strength supplement, but I think the mood effects have been also pretty interesting to me to read about, and it's also just good for muscle recovery in general, and especially with how much I'm ramping on miles right now. Like I am in that training phase where I'm trying to add on more. It's been, I think, helping with my recovery, and that is where I'm most excited about potentially trying more of it. And like I said, I've also heard about it like you, like people have talked about this in the past, but then I was talking with another friend who is more a strength athlete, and she was like, honestly, I've read so much about this at this point where it's kind of like if you're a woman and you're not taking creatine, you should ask yourself why, because the evidence is really strong for it, specifically helping women throughout many different phases of development, like as you're aging too. So yeah, that was basically why I was like, you know what, I should read more about this and actually try it, and so far so good.
Interesting. Okay. Well, once again, I'm being influenced by a podcast co-host to try something new. So I will be thinking about that. And Elena, I see also in your outline here, there's something else that I really want to get your take on, which is a separate supplement, which is bicarb. So sodium bicarb is something that I've heard a lot about. Again, lots of hype out there about this. So talk to me about what your thoughts are on taking sodium bicarb.
Yes. Okay. My other supplement that I was put on the outline, which is why Katie could see it right away, is the bicarb. I'm kind of a convert. I was like really skeptical. Will and I have a funny relationship where I like to stick to what's tried and true for myself, and it takes a lot for me to change my ways. I'm obviously always constantly reading about new training things, and I'm down to try new workouts and that kind of thing. But like when it comes to supplements, I think it takes a lot for me to try something new. And Will actually got bicarb because he had heard so much about it, and he tried it, and he was like, Elena, you really have to try this for a workout. And so basically it's pretty expensive. Morton makes a system that allows bicarb, which is basically just baking soda, to be actually digested in your system, because otherwise, if you were just to take baking soda straight, if you think about those like, sixth grade science projects where you mix baking soda into like a toy volcano and it explodes, think about your insides kind of doing the exact same thing there, which is pretty horrible. So that's why there's these expensive new developments where Morton is the main one that makes this, that they have this kind of substrate they mix it in that prevents it from being like processed within your digestive system, but it breaks it down more slowly so it's in your bloodstream. And the idea behind bicarb is that because it's a base, like if you go to chemistry class, there's some bases and there's acids, it's a pH balance, and you have lactic acid developing in your bloodstream as you're working out harder. And if you have a base in your bloodstream, that's kind of neutralizing it. So the idea is that it's like neutralizing the effects of lactic acid buildup, which allows you to push more steadily at harder paces. It's gotten a lot of attention in the cycling and track worlds. And also there's all these records currently being broken in the track world. I watched the Milrose games, saw like the 5K world record go down and the mile record. And it was just like, it's really cool to see. I think bicarb is actually a huge part of that. It might be one of these like legal performance enhancing things right now. And I've tried it now, and I don't take like the full dose. I take somewhere between a quarter and a half dose. And think I've really felt the difference, actually. Like the feeling of running at like high tempo paces and being able to just cruise at it and not feel like it's getting that much worse. I have felt that feeling. It's kind of like a flowy feeling. And that's where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to use this all the time, but maybe once a week before a hard workout, and definitely for races, I think it's something that I'm going to keep using. And I think it's getting a lot of attention for a reason. So yeah, if you're interested in bicarb, it's yet another thing to buy, yet another thing to try, but I think there's something to it.
Amazing. Okay, so I have some questions on bicarb if you'll indulge me. The first one is, have you had any GI issues with bicarb? If you can imagine this like volcano situation, hopefully it's not with that with the morning, but have you been okay?
Yeah, okay. So I was mostly fearful of this, and actually I've been totally fine. And maybe it is the dosing too. Like I haven't tried taking a full dose. Like I'm totally fine taking a quarter to a half dose. I actually think a quarter is what feels the best for me. But I'm also taking this usually with on harder workout days, so I'm having a lot of gels at the same time. So I had a few upset stomach things, but I'm almost certain it's from the gels and not from the bicarb because I switched out gels after I figured out that one of them was maybe not sitting with me as well. And I've actually been totally fine on recent workouts. So yeah, not as bad, but I mean, everyone should try it because people respond differently and maybe different doses too if you start with a smaller dose and maybe try a little bit more over time. But I've been happy with the quarter dose. I don't think it's something that you have to dose up to have more of an effect of it. And yeah, my stomach, knock on wood, so far has been okay.
Super cool. Okay, and then next question is, do you take it right before your workout? Do you take it with food? Do you take it, because obviously gels, you're taking it during the workout itself, but like what is the actual mechanism of ingestion for this thing?
Another good question. Okay, also, like, I have yet to mix this myself. Will always does this because he's like my science, like, supplement king right now. But regardless, there's a system. So Morton has a way of doing it where you have to mix things in a certain order so that you can have the substrate, and it ends up being this like gooey kind of soup with like pellets of this baking soda, and it looks nasty. And I'm like, I cannot believe I'm doing this. But lo and behold, because we're good at taking gels, taking that soup was actually not hard at all. It doesn't really taste like anything, and you're supposed to take it about an hour to 2 hours ahead of your workout. So we try to do like 90 minutes ahead of our workout is when I'm taking it. And I've actually felt that too because I've taken it an hour before and started the workout and been like, I don't feel so good. But then I can like almost feel it kind of kick in as I'm getting going. And that's kind of a cool feeling too. Again, I don't know if there's probably a placebo effect. Maybe I'm just having a good day. You never know if it's exactly from this. But yeah, you're supposed to mix it in this way, take it as a soup about 90 minutes before your workout and see how you feel. So yeah, and also with food, we've done it, try to do it with food, but I don't think you have to do it with food, but maybe I'll have to look into that. 'Cause I just like to have food on my system. So I haven't ever tried it on like a full empty stomach, but I've had it on like a slice of bread in the morning, just because I would like to have that in my system as well. So
Interesting. Okay. And then my last question is, okay, let's say somebody wants to try bicarb. How would you incorporate? Would you just say like, okay, some type of hard workout, give it a try? Should you try it before an easy run just to sort of incorporate it for the first time? How would you approach this from a coaching lens?
from a coaching lens, I would say try it before an actual hard workout. I don't know if you'll feel the same kind of effect if it was just an easy day. I think you want to try it before like a session where you're at least pushing into your zone 4, into that threshold realm, because the idea there is like, yeah, it's going to try to buffer that lactate feeling, and you're not really getting that lactate buildup unless you're at that kind of threshold zone. So I would try it on like a harder tempo workout or some intervals. I felt it the most strongly recently doing a workout that was 8 by mile at basically threshold, maybe a little bit below that, but around there. And that's where I felt like it was really helpful. And there's been some, from a racing perspective, I think people have been doing this for, marathons all the way down to like mile races and shorter races too. So there's a big range of maybe where it's effective, and hard to say where exactly it's the most effective, but might as well try it.
Super cool. Okay. And then I think this is actually a really good transition into something that's lower down in our outline, but on the topic of different supplements, different performance enhancers, let's talk a little bit about caffeine, because I get questions from athletes all the time on caffeine. How do you use caffeine? Should you use it? Especially as sort of like during a race, caffeinated gels and everything. So Elena, how do you think about caffeine from a coaching and training perspective?
Yeah, this is a great question. I honestly haven't thought ever too intentionally about caffeine until a little bit more recently, because I was really leaning into the fueling side of the equation a lot more for gels, and I have some caffeine gels. So I'm trying to think about when to strategically use caffeine gels. And typically my feel on it is that I think it helps me. I don't think it helps me massively. I think some people might be larger or smaller responders to caffeine, so it is a bit of a personal thing still. However, if it's in the morning, if I'm doing a workout in the morning, I'm going to take my first gel as a caffeine gel because I have the whole day. It's going to like get me going a little bit more maybe, especially if I'm feeling kind of sleepy in the morning anyways, and like my body's kind of feeling slow going out the door. I'll do 1 to 2 miles, and then my first gel is a caffeine gel. I have been thinking about this though, and maybe we can revisit this as I'm getting more into UTMB prep later in the summer, because I'm trying to think really strategically about how I want to use caffeine in that race, because the race is going to take me, at least 24 hours, likely several hours, over 24 hours. That's a long time. And that's a lot of caffeine to be taking in. If I'm saying I'm going to do a caffeine gel even every 2 hours, right? Then you're like taking 1,200 milligram caffeine gels. Like that seems like so much. So I want to test this a little bit more in longer events, but for shorter events, I'm kind of like, yeah, take a caffeine gel if it will get you going. I have nothing against it, although you should test it on yourself because some people will respond maybe not as well. And also there's definitely the stomach component of it where you want to make sure it doesn't like cause your stomach to flip either. But yeah, Katie, have you tried it much? Like what's your stance on caffeine at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have not really intentionally come up with a caffeine plan. I'm usually very intentional about my fueling and my hydration, but I have started to incorporate like 1 or 2 caffeine gels in a long run recently. And I do think it helps a little bit, but I will say it also sometimes makes me feel like my heart rate is going up. And if I'm doing a run that's kind of already at that like top of tempo into thresholdy place, I'm like, okay, I don't know if I really want my heart to go higher than this. So I think when we think about really, really long events like late in the day Ironman, where your body's literally just getting like sleepy even, and addition to tired, I do think caffeine can be helpful there as long as you can stomach it. But also, if you're someone who responds really, really sensitively in terms of heart rate, if it feels like your chest is getting like tight or anything like that, I would just be a little bit more careful with it. And I think probably the byline of all of these insights on the supplementation and on caffeine or whatever it is try it in training before you try it in a race. Like don't make your first attempt to take a caffeine gel in the context of a race, and make sure that you know how your body's going to react to it. So thinking about these like lower stakes workouts where you're still going hard, but it's okay if something doesn't go well, I think is probably the best place to try it out, and starting small. Like even half a caffeine gel. Sometimes there's like 100 to 200 plus milligrams of caffeine. And if you're used to just having 1 cup of coffee a day that has, say, 80 milligrams, that is a huge increase to even just be taking 1 gel. So just be careful with it, because I do think it can have some exciting consequences from a heart and GI perspective.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. I'm kind of curious too on that because, well, first off, Katie, what caffeine gels are you using right now? And also what's the amount of caffeine that are actually in them?
Yeah, so I have tried the precision hydration gels. I will say the caffeine ones do not taste good. Like the regular ones taste really awesome, and the caffeine ones taste really, really bad. So you also have to be okay with that. And then I will say one time in a race, I tried a Morton caffeine gel. It was in Ironman like last of 2023, and I literally spat it on the ground because I was not used to the oystery consistency of that. But in Ironman racing, I do always take in a lot of Coke, like just Coca-Cola flat Coke, because it has a good amount of sugar and caffeine. So yeah, a good amount, but I'm not intentional enough about it, I would say.
Got it. Also, I've never heard someone describe Morton as oystery, which makes actually so much sense. It's a really good description word for it.
And like I like oysters enough, I'll get oysters, but I don't want it in my gel. Like it's just not the right texture.
This is a Boston girl right now describing gels as oystery. Yes, but okay, I was just curious because I also use the precision ones, and those are 100 milligrams. And I also only have typically like 1 cup of coffee a day, maybe another one in the afternoon, but it would be like a half cup probably. But for some reason, I don't know if I feel the 100 milligram hit quite as hard as I would expect it to based on like the number. And I wonder if that's because you actually are genuinely like burning off that caffeine as you're doing the workout, and it just kind of gets me going a little bit more. But yeah, I don't know. I was kind of curious if you had felt that like hit as like intensely as you might feel it if you were having another cup of coffee.
Yeah, I mean, I think it feels different because if I am using this in a harder workout, like I'm gonna be tired after that workout no matter what. But I have noticed that like my heart rate is probably elevated even more than it would be from the workout, where it's a little bit hard for me to kind of settle down. My resting heart rate will be elevated overnight. Again, lots of variables here. Maybe some of it's caffeine, maybe some of it's the workout itself. But I do think it just like amps me to a point where I don't want to use it all the time, and I'd rather just use it enough to know like, okay, this gives me a little bit of a boost if I'm kind of lagging late in a race, but not to the point where I'm going to feel kind of shitty the rest of the day or not be able to sleep well and recover as effectively afterwards.
Yep. Okay. That totally makes sense. I think there's a lot more to learn on all of these things. Like I think we've just thrown out, creatine, bicarb, caffeine. Katie and I are obviously experimenting with all of them at the moment and have some early takes, but I think there's at least still a lot for me to experiment with, especially as I'm thinking about how it's going to apply to my big race, which is maybe different than how I would think about how it might apply to if I was marathon training or doing a 5K or a 10K or something like that. So yeah, a lot to explore. Maybe one other transition from that conversation, kind of linking back to the bicarb conversation, is we talk about lactate. And I think the other angle of that is I mentioned I would talk about this last week because I've been thinking about this is like lactate testing and understanding our lactate. And is that useful, or like why are people even talking about this? Should I be looking more into this? I was thinking about this because I, for a moment, was like, maybe I will get a lactate meter, and because I'm just kind of curious, like maybe I want this data, and maybe first I'll just do a primer on like what lactate is and what we're talking about when we're testing here, and then maybe talk about how we would think about testing and why it could be useful, but and the pros and cons of that. But to start, lactate testing, the idea there is that you're trying to figure out your lactate thresholds. There's two lactate thresholds that we talk about. There's lactate threshold 1, which is when your lactate starts building up but can be cleared faster than it is produced in your body. So we typically think about this as like the end of your zone 2. So like the end of your easy zone. Now you're starting to work hard enough that your muscles are producing lactate, but your body can still clear it pretty fast, which means that you could sustain that for a longer amount of time. Then there's your lactate threshold 2, which is when lactate is produced so fast that our bodies actually can't clear it fast enough. And that's what we typically call our lactate, like your common lactate threshold, probably around zone 4, because the idea there is that you could probably only sustain that effort for like an hour tops before your body's just like a lactate mess. So these are the two zones that were true thresholds that we're trying to figure out with lactate testing. And if you were to measure the lactate in your blood, you would probably see like the first one would be like a noticeable change, like probably 2 millimoles up from normal. And then you would notice another change where it just starts going up, and like can't really be controlled. And the idea with doing that testing is that then you know what those actual zones really are for yourself, which is helpful for understanding, like when we say zone 2, are you actually in your zone 2? When we say your zone 4, are you actually in your zone 4? And can you actually like maximize your training because you're doing things exactly as you're supposed to? I think the challenge with that though, even if you were to test that, I think there's two things. There's one side, which is like, is the testing even that effective and correct? And sometimes it can be relatively correct, but you get a ton of bad readings. I know some people that have gotten really bad readings on this because you literally are pricking your blood. So, and you're probably doing it like in the middle of a workout as you're trying to like do a regulated test where you're trying to increase your effort every mile or something, or every like 5 minutes on the bike or something, and you're getting sweaty and it's really hard to take your blood and it sucks to take your blood and it's just really challenging to get good numbers. So apart from whether or not the test is actually that effective and I guess easy to do, accessible to do, we were just talking at the beginning of this episode of like how ideally we want athletes to be able to get that feel, and maybe like the data can be a lot of overwhelming data. And this is probably why actually at a high level, I haven't done lactic testing for myself yet. Even though like I totally get it and it makes a lot of sense to me, but I feel like heart rates are a pretty good proxy, and like feel and experience is a really good proxy too. And I actually maybe rely a little bit more on the feel, although I'm not saying I wouldn't find it useful to know what my actual lactate thresholds are, especially to be able to see that progress over time. But I'm not saying I feel like it's like make or break for my training right now. And that's probably why I haven't done it. But if it were to become more accessible, which I think people are looking at, then I could see it being a pretty useful option, especially as people are getting going and trying to understand those zones and get a sense of that feel if they don't have that feel previously. But that was just like some high level thoughts on lactate. I just figured we should put it out there because I've seen a lot of conversation around it again recently. But Katie, have you done lactate testing, or have you thought about this at all?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because I actually have done lactate testing. So I did this in January of 2023, right at the beginning of my Ironman like Placid training cycle that year. I actually went up to Montreal with Jim and Coach Kevin to do it at this pretty cool exercise physiology lab. But talk about accessibility, like we had to cross the border in order to get to a lab that was really, really good. And I will say it is a pretty intense test. So for us, I did on the treadmill, Kevin did on the treadmill, Jim did on the bike, and you're wearing like sort of an oxygen mask thing that has a snorkel mouthpiece, which is not very comfortable, let me just say. And then you're on a treadmill that's progressively getting faster at a steep incline. And meanwhile, this like Canadian French guy who's only speaking French is grabbing your hand to prick your finger at each interval and then get the lactate readings kind of as you're going. So it's pretty intense, it's pretty hard, and the idea is that you are going basically to your max heart rate. So, you know, it's sweaty, it's challenging, etc. I do think it was very helpful though, because in that process, I realized that my LT1 was a lot higher than I thought that it was. And I think, you know, to speak to changes in at least my training philosophy for myself, I think early on I was like, all right, when we're going zone 2, like we got to go low heart rate, as low as possible, you know, be in the 120s, be in the 130s. And I learned there that, you know, my LT1 was sort of mid to high 150s heart rate, for example, which changed the way that I think about some of my runs where, you know, maybe running at 150 heart rate feels a little hard to me, or like I'm pushing a little bit, but knowing that lactate wise, I was actually totally fine. That's more of just like a steady and chill effort. That was really interesting for me, just thinking about kind of speeds and paces. That being said, I still do think I had a pretty good feel for what my LT2 was. Like, you know it when you're going lactic, you know it when you're going to the point that you can't sustain that. And I think it was like nice to have the number, but it didn't really change too much with training. And taking all those insights together, I think the most valuable thing that I could see for an athlete would be if someone really has no sense of feel. Like, you don't know what it means to go in zone 2 because you've done all of your training sort of in between LT1 and LT2 all the time, that gray zone training that we've talked about. Then knowing, okay, my threshold for going into between LT1 and LT2 is 150. I need to stay below that. I do think that could be helpful. But the other idea is just like use nose breathing or use the talk test or use all these other ways that we can kind of tap into zone 2. So again, I would rank this in the like bougie things that could be cool if you want to understand physiology a little bit more. And I will say, I'll link this in the show notes. There's some places that actually do this in Boston now. So I no longer have to drive to Canada to get this figured out. I could do it 2 blocks from where I live. But I don't think it's necessarily the end all be all of understanding your own physiology.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective and actually really cool that you did this. I mean, I'm not saying I would love to do that test. I'm not sure I'm going to like seek it out immediately and like because of your point. Like I think I have a good enough feel, although it would probably be really interesting to see the numbers and particularly maybe to see the numbers change as I'm training. I think that would actually be really interesting, but I might also still file it in like the interesting category and not the essential. And given that I'm spending on fuel and bicarb and, the treadmill payments and whatnot, like I'm going to put it a little bit down my priority list of like from a training perspective, what I should be spending on at the moment. But I still think it's really interesting, at least to understand the science of it too. I think that's fascinating. And like, I'm sure at some point in the future, I will get this tested and it'll be pretty fun for me to look at those numbers.
Cool. Yeah. So if any of our athletes do this, let us know. Send us your data. We'd love to kind of check it out. I love looking at that type of data, but I have not had too many athletes that do it. So I should probably also do it again because I have done a lot more run training recently than I had in the past, and I feel more run fit than I have previously. So I'm like, oh, maybe the numbers have changed. So might add that to my nice to haves list. But yeah, so I think maybe looking at our outline now, I think, Elena, do you want to transition? We have a couple of questions that we're just going to kind of ask each other and riff on related to coaching and training that I think could be fun. And I just alluded to something related to this, but I'd like to talk about how our coaching philosophies or training styles have changed over time. So do you want to take that one first, just to talk a little bit about how you've evolved as sort of a coach and athlete in terms of training philosophy?
Yeah, I'll try to do a summary of this. It's kind of interesting because I'm just kind of like riffing a little bit on if I were to look back, how has it changed and how maybe has it not changed. Like one of the main things that I would like to say probably like hasn't changed, but when I think about it deeply, it probably has changed a little bit, which is that I have always been a feel athlete. So like I got into being a runner from feel, actually more so than like focused training, because I just don't have the same, like I was not a collegiate runner. I ran high school cross country, but that was a little bit different. It was pretty chill. So I don't have that same like intense like workout background. So then when I got into it, it was truly just by feel and figuring it out and just doing that kind of over and over for years as I figured things out. And then as I got into coaching, I was really trying to help athletes develop their own feel. But I think maybe what's changed a little bit in that is that I've realized that, wow, like I did take a journey that took several, maybe a year or two to like get that feel. And there's a little bit more that I can do as a coach to help people get that feel, which is a bit more structured in terms of like, let me look at your heart rate. Let's talk about this specifically. Let's talk to me exactly about how you feel. And I can like, can you talk during this? Like we had the conversational test, or now maybe I'll use the walking test or like the stairs test that we like mentioned, but like different ways that I'm like actually trying to prompt people to do that as a coach, which maybe I didn't feel like I had earlier on as I was getting into it, but I think is helpful in like speeding up the process of developing feel. So I still think feel is like the one thing that's been like center in my coaching philosophy. Yet I think that I've learned ways to use data in better ways with myself and with athletes, but try to figure out with the athlete the right amount of data for them to be using. And that's probably like the art of coaching where it comes in. So that's probably my first main thing. But yeah, Katie, maybe you can give one reflection on this too. And I'm sure there's many different ways that we could riff on this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the field conversation is so awesome. And I think what's really cool as we evolve both as athletes and coaches, and as we see our athletes evolve, is being able to align the data with the feel piece. So eventually you get to the point where most of of the time you can go out and you don't actually have to really look at your watch because you know what it feels like to run in Z2, and you can probably guess about what your heart rate's going to be and about what your pace is going to be, and then kind of checking back to say like, oh yeah, this was aligned with what I think it is. I do think that that's also something that takes time though. So to your point, being able to kind of help athletes get there and tell them what you're thinking as a coach such that they can kind of pick up on those insights themselves. I think when I think about my more advanced athletes, just in terms of having done the sport for more years, they are much more attuned to the idea of feel than newer athletes. But it's funny, I mean, when I think about my coaching style evolving, I started with like data, and then have moved more into, I think, the feel camp or the hybrid that kind of hits both of them because I've evolved that way as an athlete. So it's kind of cool. I mean, I think a lot of my coaching is just evolutions that I've had personally, for better or for worse, but trying to then share that with like, hey, this has worked really, really well for me. Again, I will never give a workout to an athlete that I have not done before. I want to know how it feels. I want to know what it's like to have been there. And then I think you can have more productive conversations about like, well, this is generally how this is supposed to feel maybe. And then you can get people to kind of tune into that for themselves.
Yeah, I love that. It really resonates too of just like the personal developments that we've had as athletes, also obviously reflecting in our own coaching philosophy changing over time. I think it's really interesting that we probably did come at it from actually very different places, but have found like our own, what we think like happy medium or balance of data and feel in how we're trying to approach it with athletes. Cause I was very much like, I'll just tell an athlete at the very beginning, like just do this at a hard tempo and then do this at an easy tempo, and you're going to figure out what that is, and maybe bringing in more of the data where you'll probably like, I know like this is exactly what I have to hit based on my power metrics or whatever, and now I'm trying to like give you a little bit more feel. I think that's like pretty interesting to think about where we moved on the spectrum. And it also made me think about another massive way that my coaching philosophy has changed, which mirrors my own personal development, is really owning and recognizing and talking about all the other holistic aspects that go into being an athlete apart from just the training side. Like I will give the training plan, but more of what I'm doing now is like I'm checking in on the gear that you're using, the fuel that you're having, how you're thinking about nutrition, how you're feeling about the workouts, how you're feeling about your life and like the requirements on you. And it is a lot. Like we can't be everything as coaches, but I think we've developed like a little bit of knowledge on a lot of things, at least enough to point people in the right direction, because we've had to experience a lot of this ourselves. And I feel like I've learned so much the hard way of like being a holistic athlete and a holistic person, and like trying to fit that in on all the right ways for me. And yes, this is a personal journey, but hopefully I can help my athletes also figure out what works for them and pay attention to these things and not just feel like they're only focused on hitting the training plan, because that is obviously like what they're thinking about when they think about coaching, but there's so much more that's going into it. And so I've tried to develop my materials around those other things as well, which is something that it's very much in the evolution. And that was not the case when I first started as an athlete or first started as a coach.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think it's interesting too, because the more that we coach and then the more that we just like go through life and its ups and downs and like health things and training things and racing things and whatever it is, I think you start to have more data points that can inform what other people are going through. So I feel like now I think my philosophy or style has evolved just in that I have more data to bring to bear to help people kind of when stuff comes up. It's very rare now that someone has a situation that I haven't seen in some capacity, either in another athlete or in myself. And obviously there are going to be nuances and differences, but I do think many of these things are more similar or manifest similarly in the athlete context than we think that they do. So I think that's not necessarily an evolution so much as it is just growth. Like we go through stuff and I'm like, well, this sucks, but it's a data point, and now I know how to handle this in an athlete. And it makes me excited to kind of keep like trying things out and trying different styles of races and styles of coaching and events and coaching different types of athletes. I think that too, the idea of coaching different people has helped me kind of evolve my style in ways that, some things work for a lot of people and other things don't. And then figuring out how to tailor things to what the athlete is experiencing, where they're at skill-wise, life-wise, et cetera, has been something pretty big.
Yeah, for sure. It made me think maybe a question to you on in terms of how you think about this is like when you see something that maybe you haven't experienced directly yourself, or you maybe heard of other athletes experiencing, or maybe seen with another athlete like one time, but maybe this is developing in a different way for a different athlete. Like how do you actually go about troubleshooting that or figuring out like how you would approach that? Because we don't have the answers like, to fix things across the board, and there's still a lot of complexities and many things that we don't have control over. So like how do you actually go about like solving new problems that maybe you haven't experienced in yourself and you're trying to do it for yourself or for another athlete?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a couple of different answers on it. Number one, like do your research. There's a lot of really good stuff out there. So saying like, hey, I don't actually know that much right now about coaching like pregnant athletes, but I want to learn about that. So I'm going to learn everything there is to know about coaching pregnant athletes, and then I'll be better equipped to help an athlete who is pregnant, for example. That's one thing to think about. I think I also do lean on other people a lot. So I mean, you and I, Elena, will sometimes kind of share notes on like what's going on and how would you approach this situation, checking with Jim, checking with Kevin, checking in with coaches I work with, like, hey, have you seen this before and how have you thought about it? I think that's just pooling the data points that we have on different athletes, and like odds are someone will have experienced something or know an athlete who'd experienced something like that. But I think also I've had to learn more to just kind of trust my instincts when I don't have a clear answer. Like admit it when you don't have the answer specifically to something, but know that your experience in sort of related or tangential things is going to help you. I mean, a lot of the time, I think the things that athletes deal with do boil down to the same stuff. Like someone might have an injury that you have never heard of before or some type of health condition, but the psychological effects of going through an injury are pretty similar often across athletes. And you know how to have like empathy and support that and figure out how to kind of support them as humans. So I think figure out the parallels between what someone might be experiencing, ask for help, and then do your research are probably my go-tos for new and sometimes exciting, sometimes difficult problems.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, +1 to the doing research and having additional data points in the community of people to ask. But yeah, there is so much good knowledge out there. I think maybe one life skill that we have from college and work and now also coaching is just figuring out how to find the information that we can trust and like validate that with other people. And I've had that experience too where like, yes, an athlete had a certain kind of injury that I wasn't as familiar with, but I'm going to go read about like all the best shoes for this and like the exercises for this. And like, I'm not a PT, but I can understand like what PTs are telling people to do if they have this injury and like talk about that. And then to your point, like there's always the parallels you can draw from the emotional side, from the nutrition and sleep side that are always going to be relevant across the board. So kind of mixing a little bit of like, I'm not an expert in this, but here's what I'm seeing. I would talk to a PT specifically about this, but like this is what I think would be pretty helpful. And then also like I'm really bummed that you're feeling this way. I know it sucks. I've been there. And here's the plan that we're going to have to get you out of this. We're going to go to PT. We're going to talk about this. We're going to check in a week with a test run. Then we're going to evaluate that in that time frame. And like giving that plan, I think has been something that even if I don't know, I'm at least be able to give a plan of like what we're going to do to figure out the unknown. And that can always just be like a grounding thing because I know that I operate well when I have a plan. And I think it's very common of a lot of athletes. It's just like we like to have the plan and we like to go hit the plans that we can know that we're doing the things we need to do to get to where we want to be. And so sometimes just providing that plan has been like one of the best things that I found in navigating those situations.
Yeah, and knowing that you can't sometimes fix the problem, but you can be there in the dark with that person and be like, yeah, this sucks and we're going to figure it out, but I am a partner with you in kind of figuring it out, I think is something that's really valuable, like that I experience like as an athlete when there's coaches that do that. So I try to kind of turn that around too.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe to flip the question a little bit is do you foresee or imagine your coaching philosophy changing in the next 5 to 10 years in another way, or are you like pretty happy with it right now?
Oh, that's such a good, I mean, I feel like it would be very close-minded to say like, nope, it's all set. Nothing's going to change. And maybe I would lose some of my athletes that I've had for a while because I think they've probably like appreciated ways in which I've evolved over time. I think there's a lot of cool science out there, just like we were talking about. Like I have not tried bicarb yet. I have not tried creatine yet. But in the past, I hadn't tried high carb fueling. And now my athletes hear from me all the time on how to do like really high carb fueling. So I think as I experiment with more stuff, I think I'm likely to probably kind of give that to athletes too. And I think as I try different types of races or go through different types of life experiences, that's where I might just have more tools in my toolkit. I don't know that anything is going to fundamentally change when it comes to like 80-20 is always real. Like we're always going to do it. There's not going to come a point where I'm like, nope, you should only ever do threshold no matter what for 16 hours a week. Like that is probably not going to happen. But I'm open to those changes. And honestly, I love when I learn new things in the coaching space because I feel like it makes me better and the athletes get excited about it. And when we have conversations about it. So that's my answer to that one. Do you have thoughts on the ways that you will evolve in the future?
I think you answered it pretty well. I asked that question without even having thought about it myself. I was just like, do we see the future in any way of this changing? I kind of agreed, though. I think I'm always going to be excited about learning new science and trying new things. And perhaps I'll just get more of a wealth of knowledge on what tools and different things to use in different situations and be able to like codify that more for different types of athletes. But at the same time, maybe I don't even want to be that specific and that like organized in that way because I think one strength that I really love leaning on is being able to develop relationships with each athlete and try different things and troubleshoot different things and kind of like play with all the nuances. So yeah, I think the general style is going to stay pretty similar, but a lot of the knowledge is going to change and grow, and I'm excited for all of that. And yeah, maybe we'll try totally different things in the future and see how it goes. And we'll be having this conversation again in 5, 10 years, and we can have a much better answer. But yeah, just some interesting to think about. But mostly science, I think, is probably the answer.
Awesome. All right. So I think maybe one more question for our riffing. I think this is related to what we've been talking about with style, but do you coach male and female athletes differently? I got a question about this recently, and I'm curious for your take on it, and then I can share my take.
Yeah, honestly, my first reaction to you asking that question is no. Although I'm sure if I were to look more closely at how I'm coaching male and female athletes, there might be some like common differences. But I think because I'm trying to approach it so individually for each person, that approach is still the same. But if I'm thinking about it at a high level, I do think that my male athletes across the board, not like, again, this is a huge generalization, and I don't like to do all these gender generalizations usually, but I think I would have to say that it's more common for my male athletes to want more of that data and to really lean into that really structured approach and like really like hit the workouts, to a T, and like give me all the data and all of that. But then again, I have female athletes that do that too, and I kind of lean in the same way with that. It's just probably more common that I see that on the male side. But I don't know. I'm really curious of your answer because you probably have more of a range of people to address in this. I'm mostly runners. So yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is surprisingly no. It's not that different. I think in general, like maybe some of the specific conversations I have with female athletes, like obviously maybe we're talking about cycle stuff. Like, yeah, I'm going to coach a female athlete differently if we want to incorporate that into a training plan. But at the end of the day, we've talked about this before. I don't think that you are going to do wildly different workouts. I think questions on wildly different workouts come down to the individual athlete, where I can have, a male athlete who really needs low volume because they're injury prone for whatever reason, and then a female athlete that I need to do like 20 hours a week because they're trying to turn pro. It really isn't something that I think gender is going to determine that much. I do think that sometimes I've found that female athletes are a little bit more comfortable with like leaning into some of the more emotional elements of training. Again, a huge generalization. I have some male athletes who are really, really amazing at that, but being able to have deep conversations about like, hey, like this is how I'm feeling, it is a stereotype that I think does ring true a little bit, especially in the just talking about what's going on context. So that's something that I appreciate, but I do encourage male athletes to do that because I think the more communication that we have, the better the outcomes are going to be kind of for them as an athlete. And then for me, just understanding what's going on as a coach.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think it seems like we're pretty much on the same page with that. Yeah, I would say definitely not like types of workouts. No, I feel like my types of workouts totally vary across the board, no matter who you are, based on your your injury prone and like your experience and whatnot. So yeah, I would not say that much. But yeah, maybe something to think. I'd be curious to hear from a coach who does say they do this differently and ask why, if that's the case. But I haven't seen that in my experience.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been kind of a random but fun episode. I think we could probably close it out with our challenge of the week and gear pick of the week if you're open to it. I can get us started on challenge of the week. So something to try if you haven't tried it before. I am a huge fan of acupuncture. Elena, I don't know if you get acupuncture, but this has been huge for me with regulating stress levels, optimizing sleep, optimizing hormonal health, all those things. I do think it comes down to having the right person. So I have an amazing person in Boston that I really like going to, but I just find like if I'm in a little bit of a rut of not feeling right or not sleeping well or stress levels are high, if I go get acupuncture, I will be like amazing for at least a couple days. And it does last kind of a few days there. So if all that type of stuff, like just stress levels, sleep, all of that is something that is tough for you, I recommend trying it out. It doesn't hurt if you have a good person. Some people are like, oh, needles, like I don't know if I want to do that, but they're so small that it shouldn't hurt if it's a good practitioner. And my acupuncturist, this is very common in Chinese medicine in general, will bundle acupuncture with stuff like cupping. So cupping is awesome for relieving kind of muscle tension and things like that, as well as some different types of like incense stuff. But it is always the most relaxing hour of my week if I go. So highly recommend acupuncture.
Wow, yeah, I love that. I have done acupuncture. I was really into it actually last fall while I was trying to really troubleshoot a lot of how I was feeling. And I'm not entirely sure if it was like the thing that helped me. It was one of many things I was doing that was helping me to feel better, but I can 100% agree. And I had a great person as well who like set up the stage really well, but I can 100% agree that it was the most relaxing hour because it's just a space to go. You're truly just relaxing. It does not hurt. If you can feel like a little bit of an energy buzz even, which I thought was kind of interesting. And if nothing else, you're just getting an hour to yourself to like meditate with like a little energy buzz and like feel like you're taking care of yourself. And I thought that was even more relaxing to me than a massage, which usually like hurts. And I like the hurting, but it's like not relaxing. So yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, just one thought on that, Elena, is like maybe it's just forced meditation. Like, obviously, there's maybe some health cascading effects, but I do not effectively meditate. I've tried many times before, but when I'm on that table, I'm like so zen that my aura ring is always like, did you just take a nap for an hour? And I'm like, no, but yes. Like, physiologically, I definitely did.
Exactly. No, it is. It's like forced meditation. I think you actually framed that really well. So, if nothing else, it's just a really good way to force yourself to be very relaxed for an hour. So, worth trying for that. Okay, mine is less relaxing, but my challenge of the week is to try some easy uphill work. It doesn't have to be much. I would say, like, even just 5 to 10 minutes of steady uphill motion, whether that's hiking or like a little jog on like a higher incline on a treadmill, or if you have a big hill that you can actually run for 5 to 10 minutes up. But try to keep it really easy if possible. So your heart rate should not be out of your zone two, and it can be like within your high zone two, but you're trying to just like get the stimulus of moving in an easy way uphill. And I think that one is a really good mental boost. Like, wow, I'm just like moving uphill and it feels good. And two, I really think there's something to it. I've been feeling really strong by just mixing this in a little bit. And it's, like I said, again, 5 to 10 minute stimulus, sometimes after your workout or just as like a movement for your body. And I would say it's been really great for me. So I would try trying it and see how you feel.
Or you could just walk up the stairs at my fifth floor walk up, which also works for this type of stimulus.
Exactly. I know. It's funny because I used to, whenever I lived in multi-stair buildings, which was a lot of my life, I would always like think to myself, like, oh, this is good training. Like, I'm gonna be, I at least I'll be doing this every day, and it'll suck, but it'll be good training. So, but it's a good test. I'm with you on that. Awesome. Okay. Do we want to do gear kick of the week?
Yes, let's close out. These are both bedtime and wake up related. How fun. We're
Ooh, we're on
aligned.
theme.
So mine is, sometimes we recommend something that's like, oh, we're going to do a sauna and it's expensive, but this thing is like $4. So I'm going to recommend Yogi bedtime tea. I love bedtime tea. I have it right before I go to bed. I do think it helps me with my sleep. It mostly just cues my body into being like, okay, it's bedtime. We're doing this. And I think it tastes really good. So highly recommend Yogi bedtime tea.
Love it. Yes. And on the wake up side of our sleep themed gear pick of the week, which you could maybe call bougie, but it's actually not bougie. It's like $30. So I think it's very reasonable, is a sunrise alarm clock. There's a lot of different options for this if you look on Amazon or any of the other sites out there. But basically, the idea is an alarm clock that wakes you up with the light and also does make some noises. You can make, like, I think ours is we played like a wind breeze and some ocean waves or something like that. The main reason why, there's two reasons why I think it's really useful. One is I keep my phone outside my bedroom, which is massive for me in so many ways. If you don't do this, this would maybe be another good challenge of the week, is to try this, because for some reason it just like totally makes my brain that much chiller. I no longer think that when I wake up I have to check my phone. I'm not on my phone before I go to bed. So that way my phone can be outside the bedroom and I don't have to worry about setting an alarm on my phone, which is the main reason why I would keep my phone in my bedroom before. So it's a way to have an alarm clock that's not a phone. And then also the light to wake up to is just so nice, because it's actually like I wake up to light. So maybe if you don't wake up to light, that is not as effective for you. But just to feel like you're getting a little bit of a light dose, and also like waking up a little bit more gradually instead of like right away to the sound of the iPhone alarm, which everyone knows and is like permanently scarred on your brain. I just feel like it's really nice. So yeah, worth trying. That's my gear pick of the week.
Super cool. This is like a dueling gear pick of the week, because 2 weeks ago, I think I recommended a sleep mask that can block out the light from this alarm clock. So all my gear picks are like sleep, sleep, sleep. And you're like, wake up, which is hilarious.
Well, I mean, okay, if you don't get the sunrise effect, you still don't have to have your phone in the room, and it can play some ocean noises to wake you up, which is better than the phone sound. Although I think we had bird chirping ones too, and it did get me a little bit freaked out about birds chirping, which I had to change because I was like, I heard a bird chirping. I was like, no, I don't want to get up. So
Amazing.
find the right ones.
Oh, the user instructions. That's fantastic. All right. Well, we hope everyone gets a lot of good sleep coming up with these challenges, with these gear picks, and we hope everyone's training continues to go well. If you are new here, please consider dropping us a rating or review, and we will catch you next time.